Hey there, I'm Ken Loggins. This is Home Folks, a place where we tell stories, we share memories, and hopefully in the process preserve these stories and memories for generations to come. Our special guest today, Mr. Paul Gray Miller, Part 2 of Visit 5 here on Home Folks. Now, before we get back into the conversation, I want to remind you, while you're here at the YouTube channel, please subscribe. That way you'll be the first to know whenever brand new Home Folks visits drop here on the YouTube channel. Be sure and check out our past visits here on Home Folks on the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Also, we're on Facebook, Ken Loggins Online on Facebook. Be sure and follow us there as well. And please do business with our Home Folks partners. What we do would not be possible without their help. We'll be talking more about those partners coming up as we go along during this Part 2 of Visit 5 with Paul Gray Miller. We're going to pick up right where we left off in Part 1. You might recall an 18-year-old Paul Gray Miller had just married 17-year-old Treva Tomlinson. So, Paul, all of a sudden you have groceries to buy, a family's going to be on the way. How did we keep those bills paid?
It wasn't but a few months along till we started having babies, and we had old Ricky Allen Miller. And I was going to college down at Conway and working at night at a gasoline station. A bunch of boys had applied for that job out there out on the highway at the gasoline station. And the guy that managed it, he called me the next day and he said, "When can you start?" I said, 5 minutes from now. And he said, "Well, come out in the morning at 7. And I said, "I'll be there." And so I go out there and talk to him, and I said, "What was the difference?" I said, "I think I know 20-something boys that I knew all talking about applying for this job. Back then, you didn't get Pell Grants. You had to work your way through somehow." And he said, "Well, you were the only one that had experience." See, I had worked for Uncle Ashley Martian in his gasoline station. Mm-hmm. They didn't do flats or change oil or do any of that. They sold oil, but they had a lot of stuff for sale inside, cigarettes and snacks and everything. And the thing you did, this wasn't a fill your own. They didn't have those yet. So as soon as the car hit the pumps out there, well, your job was to hit out there and be wiping on the windshield while you ask them how many gallons they wanted and all that. And if you got a chance, you raise the hood and check the oil and do all you can for them, I guess I worked there about a year. The job came open at a truck stop just around the corner from there, about a mile or two. It was on the same highway. And somebody told me, said, "You ought to go out there and get that job." Said they pay more. And you can go to work at 12 at night and get off at 7 in the morning. That's the way I had been doing it, similar anyway, at that first place. But anyway, I went out there and I had experience fixing flats, and there was a truck stop, and they fixed the big stuff and everything. The guy asked me, said, "You don't operate that tire machine over there?" And I said, "I sure do." It wasn't electric. It was just one that you used a tool and did it the old hard way, but I'd done a lot of them for Uncle Ashley. And so he said, "This is a deal where you probably can do it if you can go without sleep very much." And I said, "Well, I can." And he said, "You'll be needing to go to work at 12 o'clock and you'll get off at 7 in the morning. So you try to arrange your courses where you can get some rest and study sometime or another."
You got a young family at the same time.
Already had,
you literally burning the candles at both ends just to make ends meet. Yeah.
And that's for friends. See, the guys that had been in the Army were going on a scholarship. Army, wasn't like a scholarship, but his Army paid. It completely paid everything they needed. And Bill Guthrie was one of them, he and his wife Dot, and a guy named Jim McGuffey and his wife Jo. He'd been in the Navy and he was on the basketball team. I probably could have been on the basketball team, but Gleghorn and I played on the freshman team the first semester we were down there. Coach had promised us if we could make his freshman team, we called it, that he'd put us on scholarship at semester. During the Christmas holidays, he'd put us on. We played on that team, and we both started on the freshman team. And in fact, we went over to BB, where Lucy had gone, and beat them. And then they came back over and played our regular main big team and beat us. So we thought we were doing pretty good. Dean Leghorn was his name. Dean and I did. It comes semester time, and of course we was either going home for 2 or 3 weeks vacation during the holidays, or we was going to have to go for about a weekend and come back and practice basketball. Mm-hmm. And it's getting to be hard work.
Sure.
No pay. And so we both carried our athletic bag, and we had our suits and whatever they'd furnished us in them. And we went in and knocked on his door. I asked him, so I said, well, we both are coming in here to get you put us on a scholarship because we made your team and everything. And he said, well, boys, I thought I was going to have a couple of scholarships available, but I'll just tell you what, I don't. But if you'll stay with us next fall, I'll put you on next September. I set my bag down. Dean set his down. I said, have a Merry Christmas, Coach. And we left.
Well, I'm going home for Christmas.
We went home.
So was that effectively the end of your playing career as far as basketball? Yeah. So your organized playing days are in the books here. How does your coaching career get started?
We first went to Wichita, and they paid so much more than Arkansas did. Mm-hmm. And her parents were living up there, and her brother was living up there, and I had kinfolks up there too. And so we go up there and got a job teaching that coming year out at the largest school in the county. It was a grade school, first grade through the 8th grade. And I wanted the coaching job, but I didn't get it. So I left there and got a job coaching at a little school out of Wichita, about 20 miles, called Furley, Kansas. And it was still junior high. And I coached there a year and had signed to stay another year. And the next morning I got a phone call from a guy over at Castleton, Kansas. I had a board meeting with Furley that very night, and I said, guys, I've had an offer, a better offer. And I said, I won't leave you because I've signed up. I won't leave you if you tell me I can't go. But I said, if you'll release me, I'll go to Castleton. And I stayed 2 years out there. I applied for a high school job at a place called Partridge, Kansas. And they were nice to me, but I come back out that day and I told Treva, I said, they're going to hire a Kansas boy. They're not going to hire an Arkansas boy. Mm-hmm. She said, sure enough. And I said, well, they know I'm a good coach, but they can't handle that with the people. They won't hire me, and they didn't. So the next year, I got a phone call from Valley View School out in Jonesboro, Arkansas. The reason they called me, I think, was because my uncle Thomas Miller had moved over there and married a Jonesboro girl, and he had an insurance business in town. And he had become acquainted with their superintendent at Valley View. They were good friends, and he knew that job was open. Later on, I found out they had 24 applicants, and 4 or 5 of them had graduated from high school at Valley View. And why they hired me, I found out why. And I would have took the job had I known this. Would not have gone. The board was locked up between 2 coaches that had graduated from Valley View. Mm-hmm. And both of them were coaching at places around Jonesboro there. And they had 5 members. 2 of them wanted Bob Wright, and 2 of them wanted the other guy. And the one, he said, I just can't vote against either one of these guys. I said, I can't vote on this. So they were locked up. And they stayed till way late in the night trying to figure out what they was going to do. And finally, the old boy that would not vote, he chewed tobacco. I could just see him, He said, well, I'll tell you what, boys, let's do. Let's hire this old boy from Melbourne, and says, if he does real good, the people will be happy with this board. So if he don't do real good, we'll fire him, and we'll have these 2 guys waiting, and probably we'll get one of them this next time and be all for it. And that's what they did. Oh, way would I went under those circumstances. Then that board told me that night. The guys told me, said, now we won't have a very good team the first year. Said, we graduated 5 starters and 2 or 3 subs. Said, we don't have much. But said our junior high team was real good. Said, they're coming on, but maybe a year or 2 before you win many games. So we're going to get with it. And I started getting those kids in shape physically. We lost the first 5 games I coached. and I was getting my zone press installed in that system with them kids. They'd never heard of it. And when I threw that zone press on, after 5 games, I was getting ready to go ahead and play it. We practiced on it till we didn't have it down pat. We won 15 straight after we lost 5 straight. We was pressing and they couldn't handle it. They'd never seen it. They just couldn't get the ball down the court against it. Of course, they got to where they could years later on.
Literally a game changer.
Yeah,
and
I stayed there 6 years.
That job allowed you to come back home to Arkansas, and somewhere along the way you had a second son, Walden Gene Miller, around 1961.
He was born in Hutchinson, Kansas.
And your better half, Treva, would soon embark on a career in education of her own.
While we were at Conway, and I was working to send me to school and buy her groceries, I came in one day, and she was keeping Ricky. I told her, I said, Treva, why don't you take a few courses? And I said, I'll make a schedule where when you're in class, I won't be, and I can stay with Rick, and we'll work it out. Just a few. And she said, I'm afraid. Said, I've not been in school, since I graduated from high school. She said, you think I can take? I said, there's no doubt in my mind. You'll do fine. So she went the first semester, second semester, and I think she went to summer school one summer term. See, I was going all the way through. I graduated in 3 years and 9 weeks. And when we left there, she had 49 hours. She went to ASU when we got over there. And I had to talk her into it again. Uncle Melvin, Aunt Margaret helped me talk her into it. She just needed another about 60 more hours, And so she went and got it in about 2 years and started teaching second grade out there with me where I was coaching. And Rick was in 6th grade when we left there, and Gene was in the 1st grade.
By that time, you'd literally almost come full circle. You've been to Conway, Kansas, Jonesboro. It's time to come home to Melbourne. We'll talk about that homecoming, and we continue with part 2 of the special visit with Paul Gray Miller. It's home, folks. Stay close. More on the way. Lots more of our conversation with Paul Gray Miller here on Home Folks coming up shortly. Right now, I want to remind you, I really appreciate it when you do business with our Home Folks partners, like Mike Watson, State Farm Insurance, with locations in Highland and Melbourne, and everywhere online at TalkToMikeWatson.com. Townsend Spice and Supply, 725 East Main in Melbourne, serving you since 1978. Specializing in custom spice blends, herbs, and seasoning. Mill Creek Monuments in Melbourne. Family owned and operated. Call 870-291-7833. Cooper's Hawk Golf Course and the Hawk's Nest Grill in Melbourne. Cooper's Hawk ranked #1 in Arkansas for 3 years straight. Come and play, come and stay. And by Future Fuel Chemical Company in Batesville, leading the way in the manufacture of specialty chemicals and biofuels. This is Home, folks. I'm Ken Loggins, continuing our visit with Paul Gray Miller. Now, we were talking a while ago about his coaching at Valley View. He and Treva are getting started with a family, a couple of young sons. Where does life take you after those 6 years at Valley View?
I decided I was going to get out of coaching. I loved it, but the pay I was getting for coaching could be nearly doubled if I got a pretty good job somewhere. And so I heard that there was a guy in Little Rock wanting to hire a school person, as a salesman in Northeast Arkansas. He had his own company, and he had an opening for Northeast Arkansas. The man that owned the company called me at home one night. Treva and I'd come in from school having supper, and he told me who he was and why he called and all. Of course, I'd never heard of anything like that at all. Never thought I'd be a salesman. He talked quite a bit. He was a pretty good salesman himself.
Sure, had to be.
He was selling me on the idea, what all it'd be like and everything. And at the bottom, he said, now I'm going to tell you the bottom line. He said, I want you to come down here and we'll have a lunch together. I'll show you my business and everything. And he said, I think you're going to like it. And he said, I think you're going to like the money. And he said, I'm going to provide you with a brand new Chevrolet station wagon to drive and have your samples in and everything. And he said, I'll pay all your gasoline, everything. He said, for the first 2 years, you'll be on my ticket. But he said, within about 2 years, you'll begin to make some profit of your own, and you can pay me back with what you make out of it. You can live on it and pay me a little to get me paid. I said, that sounds like a deal. I said, I'm coming to Little Rock and have lunch with you. So I go down there, and of course, he's selling me all the time, because I'm reluctant. I left her telling him, I said, let me talk it over with my wife. I said, she teaches at Valley View, so if we take this job, I'm going to move to Melbourne. He said, you can live anywhere in the district. I don't care where. And, of course, he knew that was going to help sell me.
Sure.
Because I told him I grew up in Melbourne, Treva and I talked about it, and she said, well, we'd get to move home, and our boys would get to move home where their kinfolks are and everything. And I said, yeah. And so she said, why don't we just try it? And I said, I've got an idea. So we sat down at the table, and I said, boys, we're going to move to Melbourne, but we're going to rent. I was making payments on our home. Mm-hmm. I said, we're going to rent. We'll rent for a year. If you don't like it, we won't stay. But if you like it, then we'll build us a house and live there the rest of our life. It'll be strictly up to you two boys. And so we moved, and rented across town up there, close to Cooktown. Oh, we wasn't. A month, they were just tickled to death with the difference in the school, and of course, but then Gene was going to the 2nd grade and Rick was going to the 7th grade, and they were happy campers. One day I just thought, well, it's time to ask them, let them tell me. So I did, and they said, Dad, we've been waiting on you to tell us you will still do that. I said, well, I'll still do it.
And I guess Treva had got in a position with the school district here.
I talked to my friend Dean Gleghorn, who was superintendent at that time at Valley Hill. And I had already talked to him about it, and he said, I've got a place for Treva, no problem. So that's what we did, and she taught up there. Bill Guthrie was superintendent at Melbourne, and he had an opening. And he called Treva, and he said, now, if you don't take this job, he said, I'm not begging you to, because I've got plenty of people who want the job. Teachers were not hard to find then. Mm-hmm. The jobs were hard to find. And he told Treva, said, I got to know what you want to do, because he said, you either want it or you don't. And if you don't, said, I'm going to hire somebody else. And he said, there's no telling when we'll have an opening in that grade school. And it was 1st grade like she wanted. And she took the job and taught about 34 years.
You talked about renting for a while and saying, okay, boys, we'll eventually build a house. The house that we're recording in today, is that the house that was eventually built?
This is the house that we built.
Okay. Is this the first house that was built in this general vicinity in what is now known as Millcrest Addition, Millcrest Acres, Millcrest Subdivision? Was this the first house?
Yeah, we bought this 160 acres, I believe it was. And built this house, and we built what we could afford. Mm-hmm. Later on, we completely redid it. Then later on, we completely redid it the final time, built a pool out the back and added more rooms on. Of course, we had Bobby Gray Miller, so we had 3 boys, And
he came along in the
Rick
70s, yeah.
Yeah, Rick by then had started to college, and so I think Gene inherited Rick's room by itself, and then Bob got the other. We had 2 extra bedrooms back there, and they had their own rooms, and this is where we stuck.
You're doing this sales job. How long did you do that?
I did that for about 10 and a half or 11 years.
Okay.
And 12 months after I went to work for him, I went in one day and his finance secretary, and she said, well, I'll just tell you one thing right now, you've got a check coming. And I said, I have? I said, I thought I might. I said, I've not paid attention. I've just worked and hoping. She said, yeah, it's not a whole lot, but said it'll be your first check. Said, Mr. Beardsley was his last name, the boss man, owned it. So I went around there and told him, I said, she's got surplus money in my account in there. And I said, I'm ready to collect my first check. He said, I can't believe you've done that in a year. But he said, I saw it coming. I knew you was doing good. But he said, I didn't think. He said, I keep books too. I said, you do? And I said, well, I hope you got the same thing she's got. He said, well, let me see. And he pulled out a big book, with all the stuff in it. He said, yeah, you got some money coming. I said, it ain't a whole lot, but said, you've cleared out. I said, next year I'm going to have a whole lot of it coming, Mr. Beardsley. I said, and every time I make money, you'll make money. He said, that's the way it works. He taught me a lot. I learned a whole lot from him. I got a chance to go with a better company. I'd been with him, I think, 5 or 6 years. And this other company come to me and asked me if I guess they'd got the word that I was wanting to change. And the guy that run it was not an owner. They was working for another big company, totally different atmosphere, totally different. I finally got off the road because I hadn't been gone so long, it was hurting my family life. And I finally quit, cold turkey. When I did, I had within about 50 or 60 head of cattle, and I'd opened up the little gasoline station.
I was going to ask you about that, and I'm dating myself here, but I can remember when Millcrest Texaco was a brand new thing and didn't have a whole lot of gas stations on the east side of town. I mean, you'd have to go down to Sage and see L-Dub if you needed gas on that side of town.
That's right.
But you had the other service stations there on the north side. You put that in, and business was pretty brisk right off the bat.
It was a mine or gold mine. Yeah, it was good. Pretty soon, see, I was still on the road, and so I tell you what, my son Gene was in the 10th grade, and so he really took that to heart. And he would open it in the morning real early and catch the go to work and go to school crowds, and all. And he'd open it about, I'm not sure, about 6 o'clock maybe. And, of course, about 8 o'clock, my uncle, J.D. Marchett, would come in and take it over. And so he'd work until around 3:30, and Gene would get off from school and come out there and take over. And he'd work till 10 o'clock at night and close it and bring the money. We had a little tackle box that I'd had for fishing, and we put the money in that tackle box, kept it at my house.
I remember you playing a lot of softball, still an athlete.
I sponsored a softball team. We called it at first we were selling Texaco gas, Texaco brand. We were Millcrest Texaco. Well, we had a decent team. Ricky played and Gene played with us, and Tim Harville played with us, I believe, my nephew, and Jim Haley played with us. But anyway, we had a lot of fun. And then one year, I took the job as superintendent at Oxford. Mm-hmm. They called me up, and I wasn't doing anything but the gasoline station and cattle, and I was wanting to do more. So I met with the school board, good people. I knew them all. So, there was a great board. They never bothered me for anything. We'd have board meetings and nothing to do much because I was, they just spending on meetings going smooth, and we'd visit, maybe have a cup of coffee and dismiss. So it went on for a year, and about halfway through the next year, Weldon Camel and Howard Lamb had installed a Dodge dealership, and they bought this clothing store where Mr. Harville and his wife had sold clothes or shoes or both out that building, and they changed that building to the front office building, and they had it looked like a barn behind that building, but what it was a service center. And so they were in the car business, Chrysler, Dodges. They were selling a lot of stuff, but Weldon said we couldn't figure out where our money was going. Well, Howard wanted out. Mm-hmm. He wanted to sell his half to me. And Weldon told me he was the go-between. I really hadn't talked to Howard, but I talked to Weldon. So I go to Howard and negotiate on a price, and it wasn't much that I paid him for his half, but he just literally wanted out. And I took Howard's place, and me and Weldon got along just fine. He got unhappy with Chrysler Corporation. And so finally one day I said, well, are you wanting to sell your half to me? And he said, I do. And I said, well, I don't want to lose you for a partner. We get along swell. I'd rather you stay with me forever. And we're going to make some money, I promise you. But I said, if you really and truly want out, I'll try my best to give you what it's worth for your half. And he said, how can we do that? And I said, I'll tell you what, let's do. I said, you go home to your house tonight, and I'll go home to mine. And you figure on it all you can, and I'll figure on all I can. And when we meet out here in the morning, we'll go out here outside where nobody hears us, nobody knows we're doing this. And we'll lower the tailgate down on the truck and sit down there, and we'll compare. He said, that sounds like a good deal. So the next morning, we go out, lower the tailgate. I look at his, and he looks at mine, and we're only $5,000 apart. I said, that's a deal done, isn't it? He said, yeah, it is. I'm happy. You happy? And I said, yeah. That's when I bought that lot next door from Nan Garwood. And I bought it with the idea of putting in a fast food. And that's what I was going to do next door and just stay in the building I was in. But in the family, I couldn't find anybody that really wanted to manage it for me. Mm-hmm. And Treva was still teaching first grade, and I didn't want to take her out of that. She loved it, and she was a great teacher, and I just didn't want to mess with it. I just decided what I'd do is build me a new dealership out there.
As that grew, I have a feeling you kind of got the itch again to enter the political arena. It's in your bloodline, after all. There had been a couple of forays into politics in the 70s.
Yeah. I had run for state senator in 74 against Nick Wilson, and then I ran for county judge in 78. Of course, like you said, I'd always had the itch.
Sure.
And the only way to scratch it was to get in and win. And I'd tried twice and failed. Talked to John E., my uncle, who had term limited out as state representative. Mm-hmm. So he wasn't working. He had the insurance office and cows, and doing real estate and stuff. So I talked to him, and I said, well, you ought to run for Senate. I said, it's going to be wide open. You get back in, and you'll win. And he said, I'm not as strong as I used to be about campaigning and everything. Mm-hmm. Well, I said, if you go ahead and run for it, I'll help you get elected. I'll do all I can for you. But I was not going to go tell John, if you don't run, I will. Right there. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to tell him that. And I didn't. I told David. I said, don't tell your dad, but I said, I'm waiting on him. If he don't run, I will. And David said, well, Paul said he's not able to run. Mm-hmm. And he said, Mom and I will talk to him. And he said, I'll tell you how it's going to go. But he said, I can tell you right now, you're probably going to get the chance to run. Because he said, Dad is just not able. So I ended up throwing my hat in the ring and campaigned as hard as anybody ever had in their life. I was determined. I'd gone twice and failed. And we won that election by 164 votes out of several thousand. I can't remember what the total was, but you're talking about Randolph, Sharp, Izzard, Stone, Fulton, and part of Independence. Mm-hmm. I had, and I got nearly all of that Independence vote. Stone County gave me just about the same percentage that I got in Izzard, my home county. Mm-hmm. I got nearly about 90% of that.
You were in Little Rock for several terms, correct?
I was there 11 years.
11 years. And then, of course, you would term limit out. We're going to talk about the legislative accomplishment you're most proud of coming up shortly. Also, we're going to talk about that additional hat you wear, that pilot hat, and hear the amazing story about the particular flight that would hasten your exit from the cockpit. It's coming up on the final segment of this very special visit with Mr. Paul Gray Miller. This is Home, folks. We're back in a moment. Stay with us. Lots more of our conversation with Paul Gray Miller here on Home, folks, coming up shortly. Right now, I want to remind you I really appreciate it when you do business with our Home Folks partners. Sonia Hames-Wiles Family Dentistry, 410 Court Street in Melbourne. For your next appointment, call 870-368-6666. Sharp County Outdoors, 587 Highway 62 West in Ash Flat, specializing in sales and repair of used tractors, equipment, ATVs, and UTVs. Triple M Discount in Miller Poultry and Cattle, your go-to for silk flowers, cemetery arrangements, hardware, tools, home decor, fresh eggs, and locally raised beef. 2412 East Main Street in Melbourne. And by Izard County Abstract, with an office full of names you know and trust. Miller, Rush, Caraway, Morris, Watson, and more. Serving you since 1954. Once again, our very special guest, Mr. Paul Gray Miller. It's visit 5 of Home Folks. We just talked about it. 11 years, state senator in the state legislature, working with Governor Mike Huckabee and Governor Mike Beebe as well. Can you pinpoint one particular piece of legislation that you're most proud of during your time there at the Capitol?
I've got several, too numerous to name, because everything that come along, I've studied it and made sure it was a good bill. I wanted to be for it, or made sure it wasn't, and I fought it. And most of the time, what I was for passed in the Senate and the House. I would go over to the House and I would lobby my friends in the House, which I had a bunch of them. Some of them I'd played ball with, and some I'd coached against, just different ways. And Paul Weaver was over there, and he and I were just tight. You know, we were for each other. And he was a dandy, I'll tell you. He was a fine one. If he told you he was for you, you didn't have to doubt about it. And if he told you he couldn't be, you didn't worry about it. You just went on without that. I guess the top accomplishment I got out of the Senate, of all the bills that I run myself, and I had help, of course, I wouldn't have done it, or couldn't have done it, is the smoking bill. Mm-hmm. It ended people smoking in public places. It caused a lot of people to quit smoking, but that wasn't our goal. Our goal was to be so you could go in a restaurant and have a wife that had COPD or breathing problems, and she would not have to breathe that smoke. Mm-hmm. Or go in the grocery store. I mean, it's public everywhere that people smoked. And I had been a smoker for a little while. Treva had been. We'd both quit. It was tough to get it going. I had come home. I had left that bill on the desk in the Senate. They call that on the desk when it's just laying there somewhere and not being challenged yet either way, you know. Mm-hmm. Hadn't come to vote. And I left it down there and come home. And I got home, and I got phone calls from some of my buddies in the legislature, said, "What did you do with that bill?" Said, "We were going to vote on it Friday." And I said, "Well, I think we're ready to pass it." But I said I wasn't sure, and I need to work on it just a little bit more. And I said, "Did you know that Paul Weaver's got it passed in the House?" And then this guy said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Well, what that blankety blank are you waiting on?" I said, "Well, it's close. It's tight." Mm-hmm. And I said, "I've just barely got enough." He said, "I know what's going on. Them blankety blank tobacco lobbyists are spending money, aren't they?" And I said, "Well, I bet they are."
That's going to happen.
But he said, "They're fighting me with it." But I said, "We're just going to have to fight a little more before I don't want that thing to lose. I want to have my counted and know that they're solid." And, of course, it became a bill. And it caused a lot of people to slow down on the smoking because they couldn't smoke. It wasn't handy anymore, you know. At home is about the only place they could smoke, on the farm or, you know, at home.
So many things done during that legislative career, including that highlight. I was curious, at what point you've done all this, where do you have the idea to all of a sudden want to start flying airplanes? Was it because of legislative business? You're getting well on in years at this point. Well, I'm just going to get my pilot's license, start flying. How did that come about?
Well, what happened when I was a little boy, my dad, before he went in the Army, of course, he was in county politics. But for some reason or another, he'd volunteer for anything that come along if it's good. He was a spotter, what they call a spotter. And at night, there'd be a plane go over. Not hardly ever did there'd be a plane go over Melbourne. And there'd be a plane go over, and he'd hear it, and he'd run outside. And he found out little Paul Gray wanted to go with him. He'd say, Paul Gray, there's a plane, come on. And we'd go out there. Of course, it's dark and everything, but he was supposed to be able to identify the plane, see, make sure it wasn't Germany. Mm-hmm. So that just amazed me. Mm-hmm. And something about that just amazed me, that plane flying and how much fun that'd be to get up there and be in the air, And I thought, well, you'd be closer to Jesus and everything.
So this wasn't like a midlife crisis or anything. This was from square one.
From day one. Later on, we lived at Jonesboro, and my Uncle Tom was a pilot. And he didn't own his plane, but he had, in the insurance business, he'd made a deal with these guys that owned this plane that he would insure it for them at his cost if they'd let him be one of the partners in the plane. And so he did. And so he became a pilot. I told him how bad I wanted to do that, but I couldn't afford it. I just couldn't afford the plane. No, I couldn't afford any of it. And so when he was going, he would holler at me, see if I wanted to fly with him. Well, I was usually too busy to do that, but I did some, Mm-hmm. And of course, the more I got close to that plane, the more the itch needed scratching. Mm-hmm. And when I got into the school selling business, I was making more money than I'd ever made in my life. And I bought this 210 airplane, and I bought it for $18,000, and it was a bargain. And I knew it was worth more than that, but this guy, he had kept it in his garage out in Arizona for years, and he could fix anything on it himself, so it was just perfect condition, but it was old. It was a 64-year model, real old plane. I'd been learning to fly with a guy named Joe Weishart was his name. He was a great teacher, great guy, and he taught me to fly his plane, which was a Warrior. And he told me, he said, I found you an airplane. And he said, if you don't buy it, I'm going to. Because he said it's a bargain, and he said, I own my own plane, but he said, I can buy that and sell it and make a profit. I know I can. But he said, I want you to buy it. If you're going to buy a plane, buy this one. Mm-hmm. I said, well, let's go look at it. So we flew up there to a little town in Missouri. And I opened the door and looked in there and see the plane I've been flying, his, was fairly simple. And that plane had buttons and knobs all over it. And I looked at it and I said, Joe, that scares me. I said, I believe that's too much for me. He said, Paul, I've taught 100 people to fly, and you're the best one I've taught. And he said, if you can't learn that, I'm crazier than blankety blank. And I said, well, you're that confident? He said, I know. He said, buy it. We'll take it home, and next week I'll turn you loose on it, because all you got to do is learn a few things, and you're a quick learner. You're going to be able to fly. Mm-hmm. And he said, you're going to enjoy it because it's a family plane. You can haul a load in it all you want to. Well, I bought it for $18,000, and I flew for 11 years and enjoyed it. And I'd fly to Little Rock to the Senate to a meeting, early morning. Around noon, we'd break up, and I'd fly back home. And Treva got over her fear of flying, and she'd ride with me. And we got to where we'd fly down on early Monday morning, and we lived in an apartment right there at the Capitol. Mm-hmm. We were privileged to have that. And then we'd fly back on Friday afternoon late. Anyway, we had fun. And I still was in the Senate, and it was a beautiful day, kind of like today is out here. And I had flown down to a morning meeting. And I'd had a couple of run-ins, with that airplane that I had to try to be a pretty good pilot to get out of it unharmed. Well, I'd stayed that meeting till around noon and decided to fly home. Sun was shining bright. So I get up in the air and I start to level it off, put it on automatic pilot, and come into Melbourne. Take about 35, 40 minutes. I look down and a little strip of oil come down the windshield right in front of me. I looked at that, I looked up, and here comes some more right down the windshield. I thought, well, I've got an oil leak. And the wind, head of it's blowing it right up on the windshield. I didn't say that to myself till it covered the windshield. Bingo. I couldn't see one thing. If I'd had a lead pencil, I would have put it in a little hole in that windshield just to see enough. No, it wasn't possible. The only way I could see was out the side, each side. Of course, that ain't the direction you're going. So I prayed all the way in. And I knew I'd always gone right over the airport at Heber Springs, going in down Little Rock. I went right over that dam down there, and the airport was right south of it. Every time I'd go, I'd think, well, if I ever get in trouble, there's my safety net right there. I'd just set her down right there, be halfway between.
Sure.
Well, it happened. And thank goodness Treva was not with me. I think she would have panicked and might have wrecked us. But anyway, as soon as that happened, I turned that nose up and got as high as I could, got up to 7,500 feet and put it on idle. Motor's still running, so I thought I can drift right into that airport just like this. And the motor probably won't be running time I get there, but I'll be sailing right on in and I can do it. So then all of a sudden, I couldn't go straight in. I had to go around, and I can't remember what it was. Might have been another plane landing, there probably was, and I had to wait. Anyway, I went over the dam, out over the lake, and I could see out my left side and see the runway. So I thought, well, I'll do the best I can to make a 180 and hope that I'm lined up with that runway because I won't be able to see it. So I got out over there and I lined it up where I thought it ought to be. And the motor was still idling. I still had power. I run right in there, and there's a guy in the shop there that mowed the yard and swept out and everything, and he was watching me. And see, I tried to get somebody in there to talk to me to guide me in. The guy that run it had gone after the mail. It was over at town. And he would have guided me right in on that runway. But I didn't have that. And so all of a sudden, I kept looking at the fences out to the right, left and right, and I had my altimeter. I had that, and I could see us coming on down. I was watching that and watching outside, and my nose wheel hit the strip in the middle of that runway. That guy that was in the building saw it and later told me, he said, your nose wheel hit that strip in the center of that thing. He said, what a pilot. And I said, yeah, God's a good one. Well, I got to the end of that runway, Kenny, and I got it stopped finally. At the very turnaround, just barely didn't run off in the grass. And when it did, as a pop, sounded like a 12-gauge shotgun, bingo. And I thought, boy, that's where it quit. I crawled out of that thing and raised the hood. I couldn't find a leak or nothing. Didn't know how it got out of that, but it was dry. Those big old pistons are that big around, that big old engine. And so later when I got it fixed and everything, the guy saved that piston for me that burned up in it. And I've got it still. I've got it. It's got a big hot black streak runs right down the side of it where that thing.
What a way to wrap up a pilot's career is to land under those conditions. I'm sure once that landing was achieved, you rethought the whole thing and said, well, maybe it's time to put this to rest.
Yeah. I flew it a little bit more. I was still in the Senate, and I flew it back and forth without Treva. But one day, I kept telling her, I said, you're all right. See, I had that guy that run that airport. He told me, he said, I'll tell you where that ought to be sent. He said, I'll take the motor out for you, and I'll take it in my little Chevy 210 over to South Memphis. It's over in Mississippi, and those guys are best I know of to redo that motor. And I had them chrome it and everything. Spent more than I had to, but I wanted it to be right. And it cost me $23,000. And then I sold it for $32,000 or $33,000. And my pilot teacher found it it's been about 5 or 6 years ago. And he called me one day and he said, I know where your airplane is. And I said, really? I said, it's still flying? He said, yeah, the guy's got it for sale. He said, but now grab a hold of your shirt because I'm fixing to tell you what they're wanting for it. They're wanting $170,000 for it. Of course, I guess he took good care of it and everything was still done, but I couldn't afford it.
An amazing story. And we've heard so many amazing stories on this edition of Home Folks. What a life well lived, and the best life advice that, if you can think of something right now that you've gleaned from all your years, not only in coaching, not only in business, in politics, piloting planes, physical fitness, the best life advice you could give to listeners?
Well, number one is always tell the truth. No matter how it hurts, tell the truth. And number two is don't always try to be better than the opposition, but make sure you outwork them, whatever you're doing. Make sure nobody outworks you. If you're working for somebody else's business, outwork everybody there. And be honest and take care of everything in the way you would if it was yours.
Life advice that has served you quite well over the years. Thank you so much for this visit. It's been truly a career highlight for me to sit down and talk about some of these memories. And once again, thank you for all that you've done for not only this particular community, Melbourne, Izard County, state of Arkansas and beyond, has felt the impact of Paul Gray Miller. And I'll just leave the mic open for you right now. Anything you'd like to leave us with?
Kenny, I thank you for interviewing me. I'm not a very important person, but I'm elated that you let me tell everything from the heart, and I appreciate it very much. And I'm proud you're friends with my son, Walden Jean, and Bobby Gray, both of them.
Paul Gray Miller, our special guest today here on Home Folks. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, I encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ken Loggins Online on YouTube. That's Ken Loggins Online on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook as well. That way you get alerts when a brand new visit drops on the YouTube channel. You'll know via Facebook. And once again, that's Ken Loggins Online on Facebook. For Paul Gray Miller, I'm Ken Loggins. Till we visit again on another edition of Home Folks, take care, everyone, and thank you for listening.